The morning sun blazed over Naval Air Station Fallon as Captain Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her A-10 Super Hornet, her flight suit still damp with sweat from the grueling training exercise. At 34, she was one of the Navy's most decorated female pilots. With over 2,000 flight hours and 3 combat deployments under her belt, her reputation for precision flying and tactical brilliance had earned her respect throughout the aviation community, but today would test more than just her flying skills. Admiral Robert "Iron Mike" Harrison stood near the hangar, his weathered face showing decades of military service. A former Navy SEAL who had transitioned to aviation command, he was known for his tough exterior and his belief that only the strongest belonged in combat roles. His piercing blue eyes had seen action in 3 different conflicts, and his no-nonsense approach to leadership had shaped countless naval aviators. However, his views on women in combat aviation remained firmly rooted in old-school military tradition. As Sarah approached the debrief area, she could hear Admiral Harrison discussing the morning's exercise results with a group of male pilots. The conversation was animated, with pilots sharing their experiences from the complex air-to-ground mission they had just completed. Sarah had performed exceptionally well, hitting all her targets with remarkable accuracy and demonstrating superior tactical awareness throughout the exercise. "Outstanding work today, gentlemen," Admiral Harrison's voice boomed across the hangar. "That's the kind of precision we need in real combat situations." His eyes swept across the group of pilots before landing on Sarah. The slight pause in his speech was barely noticeable, but Sarah caught it immediately. Captain James "Viper" Rodriguez, Sarah's squadron mate, stepped forward. "Sir, Captain Mitchell scored perfect hits on all primary and secondary targets. Her performance was textbook perfect." The admiration in his voice was genuine, as he had witnessed Sarah's exceptional skills firsthand during multiple deployments. Admiral Harrison's expression remained neutral as he studied Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, your flying was adequate for the exercise parameters." The word "adequate" hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but her expression remained professional. She had dealt with skepticism before and knew that proving herself was an ongoing process in the male-dominated world of naval aviation. The briefing room fell silent as other pilots exchanged glances. They knew Sarah's performance had been far from merely adequate, but questioning an admiral's assessment wasn't something done lightly. Sarah stood at attention, her green eyes meeting the admiral's gaze directly, showing no sign of backing down from the unspoken challenge. "However," Admiral Harrison continued, walking closer to Sarah, "I've been thinking about your future assignments." His tone carried a hint of something that made Sarah's instincts sharpen. "Perhaps it's time we considered moving you to a platform more suited to your particular strengths." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah could sense where this conversation was heading, and every fiber of her being prepared for what was coming next. Her military training had taught her to remain composed under pressure, but her competitive spirit was already rising to meet whatever challenge the Admiral was about to present. "The A-10 Warthog program has been looking for pilots," Admiral Harrison said with what could only be described as a patronizing smile. "It's a much slower aircraft, more forgiving, perfect for close air support missions where precision isn't quite as critical as it is in fighter operations." The implication was clear, and it hit Sarah like a physical blow. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, was indeed a different beast entirely from the sleek Super Hornet. Built around a massive 30mm cannon, it was designed for close air support and ground attack missions. While it was a respected aircraft with a proud combat record, suggesting it was more forgiving was an insult to both the aircraft and its pilots. The Admiral's suggestion felt like a demotion disguised as career advice. Sarah's fellow pilots shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the slight for what it was. Captain Rodriguez's face showed barely contained anger, while others looked down at their feet, unwilling to witness what felt like a humiliation of one of their finest pilots. "Sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady and professional despite the fire building inside her. "I appreciate your concern for my career development. However, I believe my performance record speaks to my capabilities in fighter aircraft." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But if you truly believe the A-10 would benefit from my particular skills, I'm always ready to serve where the Navy needs me most. Admiral Harrison's eyebrows raised slightly. He had expected pushback, perhaps even emotional reaction. But Sarah's composed response caught him off guard. Is that so, Captain? You think you could handle the Warthog? I think any aircraft would benefit from proper training and dedication, sir, Sarah replied. Though I should mention that my understanding is the A-10 is an Air Force platform, not Navy. The Admiral's smile widened, and for the first time, it seemed genuine rather than condescending. You're absolutely correct, Captain. My mistake. But his eyes held a glint that suggested this wasn't over. Though hypothetically speaking, if you were to transition to such an aircraft, do you think you could master its particular requirements? Sarah's mind raced through the implications of the question. The A-10 was indeed an Air Force aircraft, known for its incredible durability and devastating firepower. Its pilots were among the most respected in close air support operations, often flying dangerous low-altitude missions to support ground troops. The suggestion that it was somehow easier to fly was not just wrong, it was insulting to every A-10 pilot who had ever served. Sir, I believe any military pilot worth their wings should be capable of mastering any aircraft they're assigned to fly, Sarah answered. The A-10 has an impressive combat record and serves a critical mission. Its pilots deserve the same respect as any other military aviator. The Admiral nodded slowly, his expression becoming more thoughtful. Interesting perspective, Captain. Very interesting indeed. He turned to address the group. Gentlemen, and Captain Mitchell, that concludes today's debrief. Excellent work on the exercise. Captain Mitchell, please remain behind. I'd like a word. As the other pilots filed out of the briefing room, Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly. Private conversations with admirals rarely ended well for junior officers, especially when the conversation had started with what felt like a challenge to her competence. She maintained her posture and waited for whatever was coming next. Admiral Harrison waited until they were alone before speaking again. His demeanor shifted slightly, becoming less formal but no less intense. Captain, I've been watching your career for some time. Your record is impressive, I'll give you that. But I have concerns about women in frontline combat roles. Sarah felt her jaw tighten again, but she kept her voice level. Sir, my combat record demonstrates my effectiveness in those roles. I've successfully completed 3 deployments with distinction. Yes, you have, the Admiral acknowledged. But combat aviation isn't just about individual performance. It's about unit cohesion, trust, and the ability to perform under extreme pressure. There are factors beyond just flying skill that determine success in combat. With respect, sir, I believe I've proven my ability to integrate effectively with my units and perform under pressure, Sarah replied. My squadron mates trust me to have their backs, and I trust them to have mine. Admiral Harrison studied her for a long moment. Perhaps, he said finally, but trust is earned through more than just training exercises. It's forged in the crucible of real combat, where lives hang in the balance, and there's no room for weakness or hesitation. Sarah's eyes flashed with controlled anger. Sir, I've flown combat missions over Afghanistan and Iraq. I've engaged enemy targets and provided close air support for troops under fire. I'm not sure what more I need to do to prove that I belong in a cockpit. The Admiral's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes suggested he was testing her resolve. What you need to do, Captain, is understand that being good isn't always enough. In this business, you need to be better than good. You need to be exceptional. I understand that perfectly, sir, Sarah replied. And I believe my performance today, and throughout my career, demonstrates that I meet that standard. Admiral Harrison walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where aircraft were being prepared for the next training sortie. You know, Captain, I've seen a lot of pilots come and go. Some have natural talent, others work hard to develop their skills. But the truly great ones, they have something extra. They have the ability to exceed expectations when it matters most. Sarah remained silent, sensing that the Admiral was leading somewhere with this conversation, but unsure of his destination. The A-10 comment earlier, Admiral Harrison continued, still looking out the window. That wasn't meant as an insult, though I suspect you took it as one. It felt like a suggestion that I wasn't capable of handling more demanding aircraft, sir, Sarah admitted. The Admiral turned back to face her. What if I told you it was actually a challenge? Sarah's eyebrows furrowed slightly. Sir, the A-10 Warthog is one of the most demanding aircraft to fly effectively in combat. It requires pilots to operate at low altitude in high-threat environments, often with minimal support. The pilots who fly that platform are among the most skilled and courageous in the military. His expression became more serious. Suggesting someone should fly the A-10 isn't an insult, Captain. It's recognition of exceptional ability. Sarah felt a shift in the conversation's dynamic but remained cautious. I understand the A-10's mission requirements, sir. But as I mentioned, it's an Air Force platform. Indeed it is, Admiral Harrison agreed. But hypothetically speaking, if a Navy pilot were to somehow find themselves in a position to prove their worth on such a platform, it would certainly silence any doubters about their capabilities. The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah began to understand that this conversation was about more than just career advice or training assignments. There was something else at play here, something that the Admiral wasn't saying directly. Sir, are you suggesting that such an opportunity might be available? Sarah asked carefully. Admiral Harrison's slight smile returned. I'm suggesting, Captain, that exceptional pilots sometimes find themselves in exceptional circumstances. And when they do, their response to those circumstances defines not just their own careers, but the future opportunities for others who might follow in their footsteps. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she began to grasp the full meaning of the Admiral's words. This wasn't just about her career anymore. This was about proving something larger, about opening doors for other women in combat aviation. What would such circumstances look like, sir? She asked. That remains to be seen, Captain. Admiral Harrison replied. But I have a feeling you'll know them when you see them. The question is, will you be ready to rise to the challenge when it presents itself? 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's conversation with Admiral Harrison, and life had returned to its normal rhythm of training exercises, maintenance checks, and endless paperwork. She had pushed the strange encounter to the back of her mind, focusing instead on preparing for her upcoming deployment to the Persian Gulf. The squadron was scheduled to deploy aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln in 6 weeks, and there was still much work to be done. Sarah was reviewing flight schedules in her office when Captain Rodriguez knocked on her doorframe. Sarah, you need to see this, he said, holding up his phone with an expression of excitement mixed with disbelief. What's got you so worked up, Viper? Sarah asked, looking up from her paperwork. There's a joint exercise being organized between the Navy and Air Force. They're calling it Iron Eagle, Rodriguez explained, stepping into her office. But here's the interesting part. They're looking for Navy pilots to cross-train on Air Force platforms for a special demonstration. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. What kind of platforms? Everything, Rodriguez said, scrolling through the announcement on his phone. F-16 seconds, F-15 seconds, and get this, A-10 Warthogs. They want to demonstrate interoperability between services and showcase the versatility of American military pilots. The memory of Admiral Harrison's words came flooding back. Sarah tried to keep her expression neutral, but Rodriguez knew her well enough to catch the spark of interest in her eyes. You're thinking about applying, aren't you? He asked with a knowing grin. It's an interesting opportunity, Sarah replied carefully. Cross-service training could be valuable for career development. Sarah, this is huge, Rodriguez said, his excitement growing. Do you realize what this could mean? A Navy pilot proving she can master an Air Force platform? Especially something as demanding as the A-10? It would be a statement heard throughout the entire military. Sarah stood and walked to her window, looking out at the flight line. It would also be a massive risk. If I failed, if I couldn't measure up to Air Force standards, it would confirm every doubt anyone has ever had about women in combat aviation. But if you succeeded, Rodriguez countered, you'd open doors for every woman who comes after you. Besides, When have you ever backed down from a challenge? That evening, Sarah found herself in the base library, researching everything she could find about the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The aircraft was indeed a unique platform, designed specifically for close air support missions. Its titanium bathtub cockpit could withstand direct hits from small arms fire, and its redundant systems meant it could continue flying even with significant battle damage. The 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon that formed the aircraft's centerpiece was capable of destroying tanks with depleted uranium rounds. But beyond the technical specifications, Sarah was learning about the culture of A-10 pilots. They were known for their aggressive approach to supporting ground troops, often flying dangerous low-level missions to provide precise fire support. The A-10 community prided itself on being different from the fighter pilot community. They were less concerned with air-to-air combat and more focused on keeping soldiers alive on the ground. As Sarah read pilot accounts and technical manuals, she began to understand why Admiral Harrison had framed his challenge the way he had. The A-10 wasn't just another aircraft. It represented a different philosophy of military aviation. It was about service, sacrifice, and the willingness to put yourself in harm's way for others. The next morning, Sarah found herself standing outside Admiral Harrison's office, the application for the Iron Eagle exercise in her hand. She had spent most of the night filling out the paperwork and writing her statement of purpose, but she still wasn't entirely sure she was making the right decision. "Enter," came the Admiral's voice after she knocked. Sarah stepped into the office and came to attention. "Sir, Captain Mitchell, reporting." Admiral Harrison looked up from his desk, and Sarah caught what might have been the hint of a smile on his face. "Captain, what brings you to my office this morning?" "Sir, I'd like to submit my application for the Iron Eagle joint exercise," Sarah said, extending the paperwork. The Admiral accepted the documents and gestured for her to sit. "The A-10 track, I presume?" "Yes, sir." Admiral Harrison leafed through her application, his expression unreadable. "This is quite a commitment, Captain. The training program is intensive, 8 weeks at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, followed by a live fire demonstration in front of senior leadership from both services. The standards will be the same as for any Air Force A-10 pilot." "I understand, sir," Sarah replied. "I'm prepared for the challenge." "Are you?" Admiral Harrison asked, setting down the paperwork. "Because this isn't just about you anymore. You'll be representing the Navy, and more specifically, you'll be representing women in naval aviation. If you fail, it won't just reflect on you personally." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I've never asked for special treatment, and I don't expect any now. I believe I can meet the standards required, and I'm willing to prove it." Admiral Harrison studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Captain, I'm going to share something with you that stays in this room. When I made that comment about the A-10 3 weeks ago, it wasn't off the cuff. I had already heard rumors about this joint exercise, and I wanted to see how you would react to the challenge." Sarah felt a mix of surprise and understanding wash over her. "You were testing me, sir." "I was, and I have to say, your response exceeded my expectations." The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "You didn't get defensive, you didn't dismiss the suggestion, and you didn't back down from what you perceived as a challenge. That's exactly the kind of attitude we need from pilots who are going to face real adversity." "So you'll support my application?" Sarah asked. "I'll do more than that," Admiral Harrison replied. "I'm going to personally recommend you for the program. But I want to be clear about something. Once you're in that A-10 cockpit, you'll be on your own. I can't help you, and the Navy can't help you. You'll have to prove yourself to a completely new community of aviators who have their own traditions and standards." Sarah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness. "I understand, sir. There's something else you should know," Admiral Harrison continued. "The Air Force wasn't initially enthusiastic about having Navy pilots in this program. Some of their leadership felt it was unnecessary, even gimmicky. It took considerable persuasion to get them to agree to accept Navy applicants." "What changed their minds?" Sarah asked. "General Patricia Williams, the commanding general of the A-10 wing at Davis-Monthan. She's one of the most respected pilots in the Air Force, and she insisted that if we're going to do this exercise, we should do it right. No softball assignments, No special considerations. If Navy pilots want to fly Air Force aircraft, they need to meet Air Force standards. The name was familiar to Sarah. General Williams was a legendary figure in military aviation. One of the first women to command a combat wing. Her support for the program was significant, but Sarah also knew it meant the standards would be uncompromisingly high. "When does training begin?" Sarah asked. "If your application is accepted, you'll report to Davis Monthan in 2 weeks," Admiral Harrison replied. "That gives you time to get your affairs in order and prepare mentally for what's ahead." As Sarah left the Admiral's office, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was about to embark on a journey that would test not just her flying skills, but her determination, resilience, and ability to adapt to a completely different military culture. The next 10 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah arranged for temporary duty orders, completed medical examinations, and studied everything she could find about A-10 operations. She also spent time talking with her fellow pilots, many of whom were excited about her opportunity while others expressed concern about the pressure she would face. Captain Rodriguez was particularly supportive, helping her prepare by role-playing difficult scenarios she might encounter. "Remember," he told her during one of their preparation sessions, "you're not just representing yourself, or even the Navy. You're representing every woman who wants to serve in combat aviation. No pressure, right?" Sarah laughed, but she knew he was right. The weight of expectation was enormous, and failure would have consequences far beyond her own career. But she had never been one to shy away from pressure, and she was determined to prove that excellence had no gender. The night before her departure for Arizona, Sarah received an unexpected visit from Admiral Harrison. She was in her quarters, packing the last of her gear, when he knocked on her door. "Sir," she said, surprised to see him in the hallway. "Is everything all right?" "May I come in for a moment, Captain?" he asked. Sarah stepped aside, and the Admiral entered her small quarters. He looked around at the sparse accommodations, his eyes lingering on the photographs of her family and the awards hanging on the wall. "I wanted to speak with you before you left," he said. "Not as your commanding officer, but as someone who has seen a lot of young officers face defining moments in their careers." Sarah waited, sensing that the Admiral was about to share something important. 25 years ago, I was a young SEAL officer facing my own defining moment," Admiral Harrison continued. "I was selected for a joint operation with foreign special forces, and many people questioned whether I was ready for the responsibility. I was angry about the doubts, but I used that anger as motivation." "What happened?" Sarah asked. "The operation was successful, but more importantly, I learned something about leadership and proving yourself. It's not enough to just meet the standard. You have to exceed it so convincingly that no one can question your competence. You have to be undeniably excellent." Sarah nodded, understanding the lesson he was sharing. "Tomorrow you begin a journey that will test everything you think you know about yourself," Admiral Harrison said. "You'll face instructors who may doubt your abilities, fellow students who may resent your presence, and standards that were designed to eliminate those who aren't truly committed." "I'm ready for that, sir," Sarah replied. "I believe you are," the Admiral said. "But I want you to remember something. You're not doing this to prove yourself to me, or to the Navy, or even to the Air Force. You're doing this to prove to yourself that there are no limits to what you can achieve with dedication and hard work." As Admiral Harrison turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Good luck, Captain. The Navy is counting on you to show them what we're made of." Alone in her quarters, Sarah finished packing with a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow she would begin the most challenging phase of her military career. But she was ready. She had trained for this moment her entire life, and she was determined to succeed not just for herself, but for every woman who would follow in her footsteps. The early morning flight to Arizona marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test her limits and potentially change the course of her career forever. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Davis Monthan Air Force Base as Sarah stepped off the transport aircraft. The desert landscape was a stark contrast to the coastal environment she was accustomed to, but she had no time to adjust to the scenery. Her training was scheduled to begin immediately, and she could already see the distinctive silhouette of A-10 Warthogs lined up on the tarmac. Colonel Marcus Rattler Johnson, the A-10 training squadron commander, was waiting for her at the base of the aircraft stairs. A weathered veteran with over 3,000 hours in the Warthog, he had the look of someone who had seen combat and lived to tell about it. His expression was neutral but assessing as Sarah approached. "Captain Mitchell, welcome to Tucson," he said, extending his hand. "I hope you're ready for a different kind of flying." "Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity," Sarah replied, matching his firm handshake. "Don't thank me yet," Colonel Johnson said with a slight smile. "You haven't started training. Follow me, and I'll introduce you to your classmates." As they walked across the flight line, Sarah couldn't help but be impressed by the A-10 seconds up close. The aircraft looked exactly like what it was designed to be, a flying tank killer. The massive cannon protruding from the nose dominated the aircraft's profile, and the thick armor plating around the cockpit spoke to the dangerous missions these aircraft were designed to fly. The briefing room contained 8 other pilots from various services, 5 Air Force officers, 2 Marines, and 1 Army helicopter pilot cross-training to fixed-wing aircraft. The conversation stopped abruptly when Sarah entered, and she could feel the weight of their collective scrutiny. "Gentlemen, and Captain Mitchell," Colonel Johnson announced, "meet your newest classmate. Captain Sarah Mitchell comes to us from the Navy's Super Hornet community with extensive combat experience." The introductions that followed were polite but reserved. Sarah could sense the mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, outright doubt about her presence in the program. She had expected this reception and was determined not to let it affect her performance. Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Spike Adams, the only other woman in the instructor cadre, approached Sarah after the initial briefing. "Captain, I wanted to introduce myself personally. I'll be your primary instructor for the next 8 weeks. Sarah felt a surge of relief. Having a female instructor would at least eliminate one potential source of tension in the training environment. "Ma'am, I appreciate you taking the time," Sarah replied. "I'm looking forward to learning from you." "Good, because we're going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed before," Colonel Adams said with a serious expression. "Not because you're a woman, and not because you're Navy, because that's what it takes to master this aircraft and the mission it performs." The first week of training was entirely classroom-based, covering A-10 systems, tactics, and procedures. Sarah threw herself into the material, studying long into the night to absorb the massive amount of information. The A-10 was unlike any aircraft she had flown before. Its systems were older but incredibly robust, and the tactical employment was completely different from her fighter background. Her classmates gradually warmed up to her as they saw her dedication and competence in the classroom. Captain Brad Gunner Phillips, an experienced Air Force A-10 pilot who was in the program to become an instructor, became particularly helpful in explaining some of the more subtle aspects of A-10 tactics. "The key thing to understand about the Hog," he explained during one of their study sessions, "is that it's not about speed or altitude. It's about persistence and precision. We stay in the fight longer than anyone else, and we put ordnance exactly where it needs to go." Sarah absorbed every piece of advice, every lesson, and every critique with the intensity of someone who knew that failure was not an option. Her notebook filled with detailed drawings of aircraft systems, tactical diagrams, and emergency procedures. She was determined to master every aspect of the aircraft before she ever set foot in the cockpit. The first simulator session was a revelation. The A-10 cockpit was cramped compared to the Super Hornet, but every control and display was positioned for maximum efficiency during low-altitude combat operations. The aircraft's response to control inputs was completely different from what Sarah was accustomed to: heavier, more deliberate, but incredibly stable. Colonel Adams sat in the instructor station, monitoring every aspect of Sarah's performance. "Remember, Captain, the Warthog isn't about finesse. It's about getting the job done. Don't fight the aircraft. Work with it." Week after week, Sarah's skills improved steadily. She mastered the aircraft systems, learned to employ the GAU-8 cannon with devastating accuracy, and developed proficiency in close air support tactics. But the real test came during her first live flight. Strapped into the cockpit of Warthog 78-0651, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for her first solo flight. The aircraft felt different from anything she had experienced: heavier, more powerful, but also more forgiving. As she taxied to the runway, she could see Colonel Adams and Colonel Johnson watching from the tower. The takeoff was smooth but surprisingly different from her fighter experience. The A-10 climbed more slowly but with a sense of inevitability that was oddly reassuring. As she reached the training area and began the basic handling exercises, Sarah felt herself falling in love with the aircraft. Over the following weeks, her training intensified. She learned to fly low-level navigation routes through the Arizona mountains, conduct close air support missions with live ammunition, and operate in simulated high-threat environments. Each phase of training pushed her skills and endurance to new limits. The other pilots in her class had stopped questioning her presence and began treating her as an equal. Her performance in the air had spoken louder than any words, and even the most skeptical had been forced to acknowledge her competence. Captain Phillips summed up the group's feelings during a conversation in the officers' club. "You know, when I first heard a Navy pilot was coming to learn the A-10, I thought it was some kind of publicity stunt. But watching you fly, you've got the heart of a hog driver. You understand what this mission is really about." The compliment meant more to Sarah than he could possibly know. Acceptance by her peers was something that couldn't be mandated or engineered. It had to be earned through demonstrated competence and shared hardship. As the training program neared its conclusion, Sarah learned that the final evaluation would be observed by senior leadership from both the Air Force and Navy. Admiral Harrison would be present, along with General Williams and other high-ranking officials. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah felt ready. The final test was a complex close air support mission involving coordination with ground forces, multiple target sets, and simulated enemy threats. Sarah would have to demonstrate not just her ability to fly the A-10, but her mastery of its primary mission. On the morning of the evaluation, Sarah arrived at the flight line before dawn. She conducted her pre-flight inspection with meticulous care, checking every system and component. As she climbed into the cockpit for what would be her defining flight, she felt a calm confidence that surprised her. The mission began with a low-level ingress to the target area, followed by contact with ground forces who were requesting immediate close air support. Sarah's radio work was crisp and professional as she coordinated with the forward air controller to identify targets and plan her attack. Her first gun run with the GAU-8 cannon was textbook perfect. The distinctive brrrt sound of the 30mm gun echoed across the desert as she placed her rounds precisely on target. Follow-up attacks with rockets and guided munitions were equally accurate, and her coordination with ground forces was flawless. But the real test came when the scenario introduced complications. Simulated ground forces in danger, multiple threat systems, and time-critical target engagement requirements. Sarah adapted smoothly to each new challenge, demonstrating the tactical flexibility and decision-making ability that marked exceptional combat pilots. As she returned to base and entered the traffic pattern, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not just completed the training, she had excelled at it. The A-10 felt like a natural extension of her will, and the mission it performed had become deeply meaningful to her. After landing and shutting down the aircraft, Sarah was met on the flight line by the evaluation committee. Admiral Harrison's face was impassive, giving no hint of his assessment. General Williams, a slight woman with steely eyes and silver hair, stepped forward first. "Captain Mitchell, I've been flying the A-10 for over 20 years, and I've never seen a more impressive final evaluation flight," the general said. "Your performance today was exceptional by any standard." Admiral Harrison stepped forward next, his expression finally breaking into a genuine smile. "Captain, when I made that comment about you flying the A-10 8 weeks ago, I was challenging you to prove something to yourself and to the military. Today, you've done exactly that." The formal debrief that followed was filled with praise from instructors and evaluation pilots. Sarah had not just met the standards for A-10 qualification. She had exceeded them in every measurable category. Her final scores placed her in the top 5% of all pilots who had ever completed the program. Colonel Adams pulled Sarah aside after the official ceremonies concluded. "Captain, I want you to know that what you've accomplished here goes far beyond just learning to fly a new aircraft. You've proven that excellence knows no boundaries, and you've opened doors for others who will follow. That evening, at the graduation ceremony, Sarah stood alongside her classmates as they were formally recognized for completing the demanding training program. But as Admiral Harrison stepped to the podium to deliver his remarks, she knew this moment represented something larger than personal achievement. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Harrison began, today we celebrate not just the completion of a training program, but the expansion of possibilities. Captain Mitchell has proven that dedication, skill, and determination can overcome any obstacle. He paused, his eyes finding Sarah in the audience. When I first suggested that Captain Mitchell might be suited for the A-10, it was indeed a challenge, but it was also a recognition of something I had seen in her character: the refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. The Admiral's voice grew stronger as he continued. What Captain Mitchell has accomplished here sends a message to every young officer, male or female, who has ever been told they couldn't do something because of who they are, rather than what they can do. Excellence is the only standard that matters, and today we have seen excellence in its purest form. As the ceremony concluded and Sarah received her A-10 qualification certificate, she felt a profound sense of completion. The challenge that had begun with Admiral Harrison's seemingly casual comment had transformed into something much more significant. A demonstration that barriers exist only until someone refuses to accept them. Admiral Harrison approached her after the ceremony, extending his hand in congratulation. Captain, I owe you an apology and a salute. An apology for doubting you, and a salute for proving me wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Sir, you never doubted me, Sarah replied with a smile. You challenged me to doubt myself, and then prove those doubts wrong. That's exactly what I needed. The Admiral's return smile was filled with genuine respect and admiration. Well played, Captain. Very well played indeed. As Sarah prepared to return to her Navy squadron, she carried with her more than just a new qualification. She had proven to herself and to the military community that excellence could not be confined by traditional expectations. Her success in the A-10 program would open doors for other women in military aviation and serve as inspiration for anyone facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. The young Navy pilot who had been challenged to prove herself in a different aircraft had done more than that. She had proven that the only limits on achievement are those we accept for ourselves. Admiral Harrison's casual suggestion had indeed earned his salute, but more importantly, it had earned Sarah something even more valuable: the unshakable confidence that comes from knowing she could succeed at anything she set her mind to accomplish.